Question 1. A child typically screams and drops to the floor when their preferred toy is taken away. This behavior reliably results in the toy being returned. According to a functional behavior assessment, the primary function of this behavior is A. Automatic reinforcement. B. Escape from demand. C. Access to tangibles. D. Attention. Answer C. Access to tangibles. This question asks you to identify the likely function of a problem behavior based on a scenario. The key clue is when their preferred toy is taken away, the antecedent, and reliably results in the toy being returned. The consequence, since the behavior, screaming and dropping, leads to the child getting back a desired item, the toy. The behavior is being maintained by access to tangibles. They are doing the behavior to regain a physical item they want. Escape is getting away from something unpleasant. Attention is getting social interaction. Automatic is reinforcement generated internally without others. This example clearly points to getting a tangible item. Question 2. You are collecting data on a student's hand-raising behavior. You decide to measure the number of times they raise their hand during each 30-minute class period. However, the class periods sometimes vary slightly in length. To accurately compare the behavior across different class periods, you should report your data as A. Frequency, B. Duration, C. Rate, D. Percentage of recurrence. Answer C. Rate. This question tests your understanding of different measurement methods and when to use them. The clue here is that the observation periods, class periods, sometimes vary slightly in length. When your observation time isn't exactly the same every time, simply counting the number of behaviors, frequency, isn't enough to accurately compare sessions. You need to calculate the rate, which is the frequency, the count, divided by the time period. This gives you a measure of how often the behavior occurs per unit of time, example, per minute or per hour, allowing for a fair comparison even if one class was 28 minutes and another was 32. Question 3. A child learns to press a button to turn on music. One day the button is broken, but the music comes on briefly anyway when the child presses it. According to the principles of behavior, what is most likely to happen to the button pressing behavior over the next few instances? A. It will immediately stop. B. It will increase in frequency and intensity. C. It will remain unchanged. D. It will generalize to other buttons. Answer B. It will increase in frequency and intensity. This scenario describes the beginning of an extinction procedure. The child's button pressing behavior was previously reinforced. It turned on music. Now reinforcement is being withheld. The music comes on briefly, suggesting inconsistent or terminated reinforcement. When reinforcement is stopped for a previously reinforced behavior, you typically see an extinction burst, a temporary increase in the behavior's frequency, intensity, or duration, and sometimes new behaviors appearing. The child is likely to try harder or more often to get the music to come on. It won't stop immediately. That temporary increase is characteristic. Question 4. Which statement best describes the relationship between a preference assessment and a reinforcer assessment? A. They are different terms for the same procedure. B. A preference assessment identifies potential reinforcers, while a reinforcer assessment confirms if a stimulus actually functions as a reinforcer by seeing if it increases behavior. C. A reinforcer assessment is always conducted before a preference assessment. D. A preference assessment measures behavior, while a reinforcer assessment measures stimuli. Answer B. A preference assessment identifies potential reinforcers, while a reinforcer assessment confirms if a stimulus actually functions as a reinforcer by seeing if it increases behavior. This question asks you to understand the difference and relationship between two types of assessments. A preference assessment, like asking, observing free play, or offering choices, is used to identify items, activities, or stimuli that a person likes or prefers. These preferred items are potential reinforcers. A reinforcer assessment is a procedure where you actually deliver a preferred stimulus contingent on a behavior to see if it increases the future frequency of that behavior. If it does, then it is confirmed to be a reinforcer. So, preference assessments suggest what might work, and reinforcer assessments prove if it actually does. Question 5. A child engages in non-contingent screaming not tied to any clear environmental trigger. Observations suggest the screaming occurs regardless of who is present or what activities are happening, and it doesn't consistently result in attention, escape, or access to items. This type of behavior is most likely maintained by A. Social positive reinforcement. B. Social negative reinforcement. C. Automatic reinforcement. D. Multiple functions. Answer C. Automatic reinforcement. This question presents a scenario suggesting automatic reinforcement as the function. The clues are non-contingent screaming, and that it occurs regardless of who is present or what activities are happening, and it doesn't consistently result in attention, escape, or access to items. This pattern suggests the behavior isn't maintained by consequences delivered by others, social functions. Automatic reinforcement means the behavior produces its own consequence directly, without the involvement of another person. This could be sensory input, like the sound or feeling of screaming, that is reinforcing for the individual. When social consequences don't seem to be maintaining the behavior, consider an automatic function. Question 6. You are using a most to least prompting strategy to teach a skill. Which statement best describes how you will start and progress with prompts? A. Start with the least intrusive prompt possible and increase prompting if the learner is unsuccessful. B. Start with the most intrusive prompt necessary to ensure success and gradually reduce prompts as the learner gains mastery. C. Start with a verbal prompt and immediately fade to a gestural prompt. D. Provide all prompts simultaneously until the learner responds independently. Answer B. Start with the most intrusive prompt necessary to ensure success, and gradually reduce prompts as the learner gains mastery. This question is about prompting strategies, specifically most to least prompting. The key words are most to least. This strategy means you begin by using the strongest level of prompt that you think will guarantee the learner performs the behavior correctly, like full physical guidance. As the learner starts showing signs of being able to do the step with less help, you gradually reduce or fade the level of prompting to the next less intrusive type example, from full physical to partial physical, then gestural, then no prompt. Least to most prompting starts with minimal help and increases only if needed. Most to least is about ensuring success early by providing lots of help and then systematically removing it. Question 7. When implementing a schedule of reinforcement, using a thicker reinforcement schedule, more responses / longer time required per reinforcement can make behavior more resistant to A. Generalization. B. Discrimination. C. Extinction. D. Prompt dependence. Answer C. Extinction. This question tests your understanding of reinforcement schedules and their effects, particularly resistance to extinction. Thinner schedules of reinforcement, like variable ratio VR or variable interval VI, where reinforcement is less frequent or less predictable, tend to make behavior more resistant to extinction, because the individual is used to not getting reinforced for every single response, or after every set time. They continue responding for much longer when reinforcement is stopped completely compared to someone who was reinforced for every response, continuous reinforcement. So, a thinner schedule builds persistence, making the behavior harder to extinguish. Question 8. A motivating operation, MO, that increases the effectiveness of a stimulus as a reinforcer without any prior learning is called a conditioned motivating operation, CMO. B. Unconditioned motivating operation, UMO. C. Discriminative stimulus, SD. D. Abolishing operation, AO. Answer B. Unconditioned motivating operation, UMO. This question focuses on the different types of motivating operations, MOs. The key phrase is increases the effectiveness of a stimulus as a reinforcer without any prior learning. Unconditioned motivating operations, UMOs, have their effects on reinforcement effectiveness and behavior likelihood because of biological needs or events, not because they've been paired with other stimuli. Examples include deprivation of food, makes food reinforcing, or water, makes water reinforcing, pain, makes pain reduction reinforcing, or extreme temperature, makes warmth/coolness reinforcing. Conditioned MOs, CMOs, get their effects through learning. An SD signals availability of reinforcement, and an abolishing operation is a type of MO that decreases effectiveness. UMMOs are the unlearned drivers of motivation. Question 9. When using a behavior chain, if a learner only completes the last step independently after prompts were used for all preceding steps, reinforcement should be delivered contingent on A. Completing the first step, B. Completing the last step independently, C. Completing any step with a prompt, D. Completing the entire task analysis from start to finish without any prompts. Answer B. Completing the last step independently. This question describes a scenario that fits with backward chaining. In backward chaining, the learner is prompted through all steps except the last one. The critical point is that reinforcement is delivered only when the learner successfully completes the last step in the chain independently. This makes the completion of the last step the most powerful part of the chain and helps the learner connect the entire sequence leading up to the final reinforced step. While the goal is eventual independence for the whole task, option D. Reinforcement in backward chaining is specifically tied to mastering the last step first. Question 10. You are teaching a child to identify objects. You show them a picture of a car and say, "Touch car." They touch the picture. You then show them a picture of a truck and say, "Touch truck." They touch the truck. This is an example of teaching. A. Stimulus generalization. B. Response generalization. C. Conditional discrimination. D. Simple discrimination. Answer D. Simple discrimination. This question describes teaching simple discrimination. Simple discrimination involves teaching the learner to respond differently in the presence of two different stimuli, an SD and an SD, or two different SDs for different responses. In this case, the stimuli are the picture of the car and the picture of the truck, and the responses are touching the correct picture. The learner is learning to discriminate between the two pictures based on your verbal cue. Conditional discrimination involves a third stimulus that tells you which of the other stimuli is correct, example matching to sample. Stimulus/response generalization involve responding similarly across stimuli or using the same response for different outcomes. This is a straightforward example of discriminating between two distinct stimuli. Question 11. A behavior intervention plan, BAP, should be based on A. Anecdotal reports from staff. B. The most convenient intervention for staff to implement. C. The results of a functional behavior assessment, FBA. D. The client's diagnosis. Answer C. The results of a functional behavior assessment, FBA. This question is about the foundation of effective and ethical behavior intervention. A behavior intervention plan, BAP, should always be based on the results of a functional behavior assessment, FBA. The FBA helps you understand why the challenging behavior is happening, its function. Once you know the function, you can create an intervention plan that directly addresses that function, which is far more likely to be effective and appropriate than choosing interventions based on guesswork, convenience, or diagnosis alone. A good BIP flows directly from understanding the behavior's purpose. Question 12. When graphing behavior data, a sudden, steep upward trend on a line graph indicates A. The behavior is decreasing rapidly. B. The behavior is increasing rapidly. C. The behavior is stable. D. Data collection is unreliable. Answer: B. The behavior is increasing rapidly. This question tests your ability to interpret basic visual data on a line graph, which is essential in ABA. On a line graph where the vertical axis represents the behavior measure, like frequency or duration, and the horizontal axis represents time, like sessions or days, a line that goes up sharply indicates that the behavior is occurring more often or for longer periods. It's increasing. A downward trend means decreasing. A relatively flat line means stable, and unreliable data collection might show erratic points or trends, but a steep upward slope specifically means rapid increase. Question 13. Which ethical consideration is most relevant when deciding to implement a punishment procedure? A. Ensuring staff convenience. B. Documenting only the positive effects. C. Considering less restrictive alternatives first. D. Relying solely on anecdotal reports for effectiveness. Answer: C. Considering less restrictive alternatives first. This question touches on a key ethical guideline in ABA regarding the use of punishment. Punishment procedures, especially intrusive ones, are considered more restrictive than reinforcement-based strategies like differential reinforcement. Ethical practice requires behavior analysts to consider and attempt less restrictive interventions before implementing more restrictive procedures like punishment. This ensures we are using the mildest effective methods necessary to change behavior, prioritizing reinforcement strategies first. Convenience, biased reporting, or lack of objective data are all unethical practices. Question 14. A child screams and hits their head. Medical evaluation rules out any physical cause. The screaming and hitting seem to occur randomly, even when the child is alone and no demands are placed. The behavior provides intense sensory feedback. This behavior is likely maintained by A. Socially mediated reinforcement. B. Automatic reinforcement. C. Escape. D. Tangible access. Answer: B. Automatic reinforcement. This scenario again points strongly to automatic reinforcement. The clues are medical evaluation rules out any physical cause, suggesting it's not just pain, occurs randomly, even when the child is alone and no demands are placed, rules out escape, attention, tangibles from others, and provides intense sensory feedback. Automatic reinforcement occurs when the behavior itself produces a consequence, often sensory, that maintains the behavior without requiring another person. Head hitting providing sensory feedback is a common example of a behavior potentially maintained by automatic reinforcement. Question 15. When preparing for an observation to collect data, what is the most important step? A. Gathering all necessary materials, example data sheets, timer. B. Establishing clear inter-observer agreement procedures. C. Ensuring the behavior is defined in observable and measurable terms. D. Informing the individual that their behavior will be observed. Answer: C. Ensuring the behavior is defined in observable and measurable terms. While all the options are important aspects of data collection, the most fundamental step is having a clear, objective definition of the behavior you are going to measure. If the behavior isn't defined in a way that everyone can agree on exactly what counts and what doesn't, observable and measurable, that the data you collect will be inconsistent and unreliable, no matter how good your materials, IOA procedures, or communication are. A solid behavior definition is the essential starting point for accurate measurement. Question 16. You are teaching a child to label animals. You show a picture of a cat and say cat. The child repeats cat. This instance of the child saying cat is an example of which verbal operant? A. Tact. B. Manned. C. Chok. T. Intraverbal. Answer: C. Etroik. This question tests your knowledge of verbal behavior operants, specifically the echoic. An echoic is a verbal response that is controlled by a verbal stimulus, someone else's spoken words, and has both point-to-point correspondence, the sounds match in sequence, and formal similarity, It sounds exactly like the stimulus. The teacher saying cat is the verbal stimulus, and the child repeating cat is the response that matches it sounds wise. If they said cat because they saw the picture, nonverbal stimulus, it would be attacked. If they said cat because they wanted a toy cat, it would be a mand. Repeating sounds is echoic. Question 17. A temporary increase in the value of a reinforcer and behaviors that have led to it, caused by deprivation, is known as a abolishing operation, AO. B. Establishing operation, EO. C. Discriminative stimulus, SD. D. Conditioned reinforcer. Answer: B. Establishing operation, EO. This question refers to the concept of an establishing operation, EO, which is a type of motivating operation, MO. An EO increases the current effectiveness of a reinforcer and increases the likelihood of behaviors that have resulted in that reinforcer in the past. Deprivation, not having had access to something for a while, is a common way to establish something as a powerful reinforcer, and thus is an EO. For example, going without water for hours, deprivation, functions as an EO that makes water highly reinforcing. An abolishing operation, AO, is the opposite, decreasing effectiveness, like satiation. SD's signal reinforcement availability, not change value. Conditioned reinforcers gain value through learning. Question 18. In a reversal experimental design example, a BAB, what is the purpose of the second A phase, return to baseline? A. To show that the intervention is generalizable. B. To demonstrate that the intervention caused the change in behavior. C. To provide the client with a break from the intervention. D. To compare the behavior rate in two different settings. Answer: B. To demonstrate that the intervention caused the change in behavior. This question asks about the purpose of a reversal phase in an ABAB experimental design, a common way to show control over behavior in single-subject research. The A phase is baseline, B is intervention. When you return to baseline conditions, the second A phase, if the behavior reverses back to near baseline levels and then changes again when the intervention is reintroduced, the second B. This provides strong evidence that the intervention, B, was the cause of the behavior change. It rules out other explanations like time passing or other events. It's about showing a functional relationship. Question 19. When teaching a skill using forward chaining, where is reinforcement delivered after the first successful independent step? A. Only after the entire chain is completed independently. B. After the learner completes the first step independently. C. After the learner completes the last step independently. D. After the learner completes any step independently. Answer: B. After the learner completes the first step independently. This question is about the specific procedure of forward chaining. In forward chaining, you break the skill into steps. Task analysis. You teach the first step until the learner can do it on their own, prompting through subsequent steps. Reinforcement is delivered immediately upon the learner completing the first step independently. Once that first step is mastered, you then teach the first and second steps, reinforcing after the second step, and so on, moving forward through the chain. Backward chaining reinforces the last step. Total task reinforces completing the whole thing. Forward chaining focuses on mastering and reinforcing the initial steps first. Question 20. A behavior analyst suspects a child's tantrum behavior is maintained by attention, but they are unable to conduct a functional analysis due to logistical constraints. Which type of FBA would be the next most informative to help confirm the hypothesis about the function? A. Indirect assessment example interview. B. Free operant observation. C. Descriptive assessment example ABC data. D. Paired stimulus preference assessment. Answer: C. Descriptive assessment example ABC data. This question requires you to think about the hierarchy of FBA methods when a functional analysis isn't feasible. Functional analysis is the most definitive, but if you can't do that, the next best approach is direct observation in the natural environment using descriptive assessment methods, like collecting ABC data. Observing the behavior as it occurs and recording the antecedents and consequences can help you identify patterns that support or refute your hypothesis about the function. Indirect assessments rely on memory and report, which are less reliable. Preference assessments identify reinforcers, but don't explain why the problem behavior occurs. Descriptive data gives you objective information about the ABC relationships in the real world. Question 21. If a behavior intervention plan reduces a problem behavior in the therapy room, but the behavior increases significantly when the client is in the classroom, this could be an example of A. Stimulus generalization. B. Response generalization. C. Behavioral contrast. D. Extinction burst. Answer. C. Behavioral contrast. This question describes behavioral contrast. Behavioral contrast happens when the rate of a behavior changes in one setting in the opposite direction of change in the rate of behavior in another setting. In this case, the behavior decreased in the therapy room, where the intervention, likely extinction or punishment, was applied, but this change was accompanied by an increase in the behavior in the classroom, where the intervention was not applied. Or perhaps reinforcement for the behavior was more readily available there. It's a shift in behavior rate across different environments due to changes in consequences in one of them. Question 22. Which of the following is the most important ethical guideline when selecting an intervention for a client? A. Choose the intervention preferred by the client's parent or guardian. B. Select the intervention that has the most scientific evidence supporting its effectiveness for similar behaviors and individuals. C. Use the intervention that is easiest for the implementation team to carry out. D. Ensure the intervention targets multiple behaviors simultaneously. Answer. B. Select the intervention that has the most scientific evidence supporting its effectiveness for similar behaviors and individuals. This question addresses a core ethical responsibility for behavior analysts, using evidence-based practice. While considering parent preference, feasibility, and targeting multiple behaviors can be relevant, the most important ethical factor is choosing interventions that are supported by scientific research as being effective for the type of behavior and individual you are working with. This ensures you are providing the most appropriate and potentially successful treatment available, maximizing the likelihood of positive outcomes for the client. Question 23. When using a differential reinforcement procedure, it is crucial that the reinforcement used for the desired or alternative behavior is A. Delivered on a fixed schedule. B. More powerful than the reinforcement maintaining the problem behavior. C. Delivered immediately after the problem behavior. D. Only delivered in the presence of a specific SD. Answer. B. More powerful than the reinforcement maintaining the problem behavior. This question highlights a critical factor for successful differential reinforcement. For differential reinforcement to be effective, the consequence you provide for the desired behavior, the reinforcement, must be more motivating or more powerful for the individual than the consequence they were getting for the problem behavior. The reinforcement you are putting on extinction. If the problem behavior's payoff is stronger, the person is less likely to switch to the desired behavior. You need to make the desired behavior the more attractive option by using potent reinforcement. Question 24. The process of pairing a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus, or a conditioned stimulus, to evoke a conditioned response is known as A. Operant conditioning. B. Stimulus control. C. Respondent conditioning. D. Generalization. Answer. C. Respondent conditioning. This question defines respondent conditioning, also known as classical or Pavlovian conditioning. It's about learning through association, specifically pairing two stimuli together so that a previously neutral stimulus comes to elicit an involuntary response. a conditioned response that was originally elicited by the unconditioned stimulus. The classic example is Pavlov's dogs. Pairing a bell, neutral stimulus, with food, unconditioned stimulus, caused the dogs to eventually salivate, conditioned response, just at the sound of the bell. Operant conditioning is about behaviors influenced by consequences. Question 25. If a graph shows behavior data points that are widely scattered and do not follow a clear pattern or trend, this might indicate A. The intervention is highly effective. B. The behavior is under strong stimulus control. C. The behavior definition may be unclear or data collection is inconsistent. D. The reinforcement schedule is very dense. Answer: C. The behavior definition may be unclear or data collection is inconsistent. This question asks you to interpret data variability on a graph. When your data points are scattered all over the place without a clear upward, downward, or stable trend, it often suggests problems with the measurement itself. If the behavior isn't clearly defined, different observers, or even the same observer over time, might record it inconsistently. This inconsistency leads to unreliable data that jumps around. While behavior can naturally be variable, consistently scattered data is a major red flag, suggesting you need to review your behavior definition and data collection procedures for clarity and reliability.